Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Commissioner Chronicles. Today and next week, we are coming at you with a two-part Scott Fish series because I am bringing him on for two things I know he is an expert at. This week, we are doing the redraft version of the Commissioner Chronicles, talking about everything you need from a redraft perspective as a commissioner. And next week, make sure you tune in. We're going to talk about everything you do in season as a Dynasty commissioner. So, I guess before we start off, Scott, how's it going tonight, Dan?
It's going great, man. This is fun. I love this show. I love I've seen every single one. I've binged them. I've watched a couple of them twice, I don't often do that with podcasts, but this one's really informative and good to listen to.
We appreciate your support and all your retweets and all those great things, Scott. And also, we appreciate you coming on today. So let's start off with redraft leagues. I think most redraft leagues, yes, we can talk about bylaws, but I've already done a bylaws episode. So yes, let's put it this way. Even in a redraft league, you need bylaws, right, Scott?
Absolutely. Definitely need bylaws in a redraft league. There's probably a little less to cover, but you definitely need rules so that people don't try to find loopholes and slip things through.
And some of the things we'll go through will be stuff that you put into bylaws. So the first thing is your draft order. I know that you're a big fan of that 50-yard dash site for draft orders. Is that your most common way of doing draft orders for redraft? Is it another randomization? Or how do you like to do draft orders as a redraft commissioner?
I will say my most common is just hitting the random button. Honestly, I wish I was more creative, but there's Kentucky Derby style. There's the 100-yard dash site, 100-yard rush, I believe it's called, 100yardrush.com. There's pulling names from a hat, which we used to do in my home redraft league, not to be confused with my awesome home keeper league. There are lots of different ways you could do it, but you just got to make sure it's something that's 100% fair to all 12 members, unless you're in one of those redraft leagues where you do redraft every year, but you decide to take last year into account when you're doing draft order as kind of bonuses and bonuses to those who did poorly and whatnot. I can see doing that. I've heard of that out there, but for the most part, I try to keep it even and fair for all 12 teams.
Nice. That makes sense. Next, we'll go to the draft. When you're about to commish a draft that's about to be conducted, whether it's a live draft, a slow draft, I'm guessing most redraft leagues these days are live drafts. What are some things you take into account, things that you consider? What are you doing for a redraft, live draft that you aren't doing maybe for a dynasty one?
Mainly less rounds.
Yeah.
So for redraft leagues, and it's really annoying to say this because I have played with a lot of really great redraft people, but they seem to be a little more casual. I think most redraft leagues are a lot more casual users, except for the high stakes ones are probably more hardcore. But there are things that you generally put in tow in redraft leagues that you wouldn't as much in say a dynasty league, where you want to make sure people are drafting their starting roster in general. Otherwise, they might forget. Just for the casual users, there are things like oh boy, yeah, I'm blanking on a lot of other differences, but I know that's one that you want to make sure they're drafting at least a starting lineup, and then they can adjust it after. You need a little more of a savvy owner to be like, draft whoever you want and fix it before the draft. But you can do either. I would just if you're in a really casual league, you generally want to make sure that they have everything set up, because you get those casual redraft leagues with people who, they don't play a lot of fantasy football.
I will say that you talked about how ensuring people draft a minimum amount. I know that the even more so casual leagues sometimes have position maximums, like you can only roster 3 QBs or you can only roster 6 running backs. I'm guessing you're not a fan of that, but kind of explain why that might be a good idea, or is it just never a good idea to do position maximums?
I honestly, personally, I don't think it's ever a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I do get why some leagues do it. It's the same reason there are rules against redraft leagues a lot of times have rules against roster turning, which is you pick up players off the waiver wire and drop them to lock them, so that the more casual user who doesn't realize that they need to go get a defense for this week or whatever, or a kicker. It's so weird to talk about defenses and kickers, isn't it, Nathan?
Yeah, of course.
But it's so much more common in redraft leagues.
And I will say that the roster turning thing, that is like the default setting on your more casual leagues, ESPN, Yahoo, and MFL easily allows you to not allow that by just saying once a player is dropped, they're available. They also allow the inverse setting that you can also lock players when they're dropped. But I think especially for redraft, to avoid roster churn, making players immediately available when dropped or having like a daily waiver run makes the most sense.
Absolutely. And obviously, me, I'm 100% with you. My standard is what you've talked about on the show is there's a waiver run on Wednesday and then everybody's free agents. You can pick them up at will. That way you completely avoid roster churning. They're just free agents. When you drop them, they're a free agent unless it's before the waiver run. But in your casual redraft leagues, that's less of a thing. They do like locks. There are casual players that are like, I'm busy during the day, or I'm not on my phone all the time to go get to pick up these players. It's definitely a thing. And we're talking more casual redraft leagues. If I talked about my personal redraft leagues, it's a little bit different. But casual public ones, that's the way it is.
And this is something that is going to come into account this year than in previous years or possibly ever. But more and more redraft leagues are implementing an IR for the 2020 season. Now, let's kind of look at it for more of a broad scope. What are your general thoughts on IR and redraft? Do you think it's necessary, unnecessary? And you can also throw in your COVID thoughts as well.
I'm going to throw a question at you right before I get it. What do you think the most common IR setting is in casual redraft leagues?
Zero.
It might be 0 or it might be 1. Those are the two most common. The most common I see is 1, but I can definitely see it being 2 or 0 as well.
Yeah, but before this year, I had never played in an IR redraft league personally, but I do know they exist.
Yeah. The most common I see out there is 1, but I also see a lot with 0. I would guess that those are the absolute 2 most common. And I'm playing in 1 this year that the commissioner upped it to 3 for COVID. so that tells you how your regular redrafters view IR. For any given year is a very low amount. For me, for COVID, it all depends on how you feel about IR hoarding. And what IR hoarding, for those not aware who are listening, is when you pick a guy up off waivers who's already on IR and then just stash them. I think most redraft leagues really frown on that, and that's the reason for the low limits. So I think I can see why most redraft leagues are, for COVID this year, moving to 3 to 5 range instead of the just 1 spot. As you know, in Dynasty, if you don't allow hoarding, I'm probably fine with unlimited. But in redraft leagues, you got to bump it up this year. You just do. It's for 2 reasons: players going on COVID and the lack of training camp, etc., is gonna create more injuries. The last time there was a shortened training camp, there was, I think I heard on a show the other day, there was 43% more injuries. So it's just going to happen. There's going to be more injuries this year.
Yeah, and I will say that it takes some commish work, but putting an anti-hoarding rule fixes any sort of IR complications. Yeah. You can put it at unlimited, put it at 10, put it at a reasonably large number. It only just requires you to be, as the commissioner, to look at the waiver wire and say, okay, is anyone picking up a player and then immediately placing them on IR? So IR hoarding is player on IR, picking them up and immediately placing on IR so you can pick up another player. So obviously, for the most part, I don't think there's really a commissioner rule that wants that to be happening in their league. Anyways.
No. Yeah, and it's also one that, A, you can check for, and B, you can tell your league, hey, if you see it, let me know.
Yeah, that if you see something, say something is something we'll be talking about in next week's episode of the Dynasty version of this. All right, let's go on to a common problem that isn't in Dynasty but is in redraft, and that's motivation.
Yeah.
So what are some ways teams' motivation, once they look like I'm 1-4, I'm 2-5, what do I do for those teams to make them not want to just check out? Because we all know that unsubmitted lineups, not competing in waivers, things like that, can ruin a league.
Yeah, if you're in your regular casual redraft league with no end of season toilet, I'm not a big toilet bowl guy, but I am for redraft leagues. It's one of those things you just need some kind of carrot for them to keep playing for. For example, weekly high scores, or have a toilet bowl, or create something that allows bottom teams like rivalry games, and have them later in the season so that a team who may be out of it may get up for one rivalry game. That you gotta have little carrots that entice people to keep playing throughout the season. For the most part, I think you get a lot of good owners that most people, play it through, but it doesn't hurt to have those carrots that feed into motivation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's kind of hard to contrive motivation. So you got to find what fits for your individual owners. If trophies work, great. If rivalries work, those are great too.
Yeah. I will add one more. I have seen a redraft. I haven't done this, but I've seen a redraft league give $1 for the weekly high quarterback, tight end, running back, wide receiver, and that can be on a crappy team. So you might want to still submit a good lineup just in case you have that guy blow up that week.
And for the next thing, I've seen this done a variety of ways. I've seen people extremely for it, extremely against it. It's waiver and trade rules once teams are mathematically eliminated. I think the most common thing, if commissioners want to do the legwork themselves, is saying that once you're mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, you must stop making waiver pickups. You must stop making trades. So what are your thoughts on that?
You hate to do that because it kills activity, but it also destroys collusion and people getting upset and unfairness. I will say my home league did it for years. We don't anymore, but I have zero problem with that. We used to, once you're mathematically eliminated, no more trading or waivers for that guy. And nobody complained about that rule. And I'd say it is very common.
Yeah, for sure. And then kind of part of that rule, and not exactly, but another consideration with that rule is a trade deadline. Obviously, with trade deadlines in a Dynasty league, if they exist at all, it's as late as possible, week 13, week 14. Yeah. In redraft, that's a different story because, one, in redraft leagues, there's much more. I mean, this is a very broad way of looking at things, but when you're playing in a redraft league, it's more often than not the people in real life, or you have a deeper connection than a Dynasty. I play a Dynasty league with hundreds of people, and I barely know their names. In redraft, I know all their names. I talk with them in real life, so I think that's definitely more common in redraft. And so, when is your trade deadline in redraft, and why is it that?
So my trade deadline is week 11 in my redraft leagues. And the most common trade deadline out there back in the day used to be week 8. And recently, in the last, say, decade or so, it's moved all the way to week 10. Just the most common one out there. But I do week 11 just probably because of that dynasty mindset shifting in and making sure. But people in redraft leagues are a lot more worried about that kind of thing, messing with the potential playoffs than Dynasty is, because Dynasty teams can be building for the far future. In redraft, you don't have that. If you've got teams that aren't mathematically eliminated, but they're a 4-win team come week 10, or a 5-win team, but they're not completely mathematically eliminated. People in leagues don't want them making trades in the last couple of weeks that can affect things. It's just the way it is. It's a weirdly different mindset than Dynasty.
Yeah, it's interesting because people talk about how they don't really like to make redraft trades because there isn't really a way. There's win-win trades in Dynasty. There's, okay, you helped me win this year, I helped you win next year. Right. In redraft, there's kind of if you trade a running back for a wide receiver, there's filling a need. But pretty much in every redraft trade, there's a winner and a loser. There's someone who benefited and someone who lost.
Yep. It's all about player value. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, so that should wrap up this edition of the Redraft Commissioner Chronicles. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, next week to tune in to our in-season Dynasty edition of the Commissioner Chronicles with Scott Fish. Thank you so much. Any last words before we head out, Scott?
Yeah, if you're in a redraft league, there tends to be a lot more casual players. So the one thing I always recommend is when you have things like trade deadlines or different variations of things that go on during the season, make sure to post a reminder to your league or email your league a reminder of certain events that happen. And also just for fun, hey, the playoffs are starting, or maybe this is the potential, playoff seeds. That's always fun. But definitely for things like the trade deadline, send out a reminder.
Alrighty, that'll do it for this week. We'll talk to you guys next week.